You don't enter a store. You enter a ritual. The gleaming glass isn't architecture, it's an altar. The lights aren't illumination, they are symbols of initiation. Machiavelli observed this kind of scenario 500 years ago, when sapphire screens and brushed titanium didn't yet exist, but the mechanism was the same. He said that true power doesn't come from force, it comes from performance. You enter only to look, with your old cell phone in your pocket, still functional, but imperfect enough for your mind to start conspiring against you. A tiny crack in the screen, a battery that takes a long time to charge, and suddenly you're no longer comparing objects. You're comparing identities. Machiavelli would have smiled at this. He knew that man doesn't buy what he needs. He buys what makes him appear to be something else to himself. You convince yourself that you need the upgrade because the lie needs to be comfortable. It's for work, you say. It's productivity. This phrase is merely the ethical cloak that covers the raw desire to rewrite your own image. You leave with a new device in your hand as if carrying an invisible scepter. For a few minutes, you are no longer yourself. You are the character the shop window promised. But the game doesn't end at the store door. It begins there. Inside the car, when you look at that perfect object and feel an inexplicable discomfort as you pull the old, worn, bent cable out of your pocket. The contrast hurts. And the pain is the first sign that you've already lost the battle. Machiavelli would call this a rupture of symbolic coherence. Your new artifact screams a narrative that the rest of your life doesn't follow. And everything that doesn't follow begins to seem unworthy. It's not the cable that's ugly. It's you who now feels out of place in your own scenario. You buy the charger without realizing you're not buying plastic and magnets. You're buying inner silence. You buy the leather case because the ordinary plastic now accuses you. You buy the headphones because the old wire humiliates you. In 2 days, what was a decision becomes a sequence of obediences. You still think you're in control, but Machiavelli would have called this invisible domination when the object begins to write the rules of your conduct. You are no longer the owner, you are the subject. This is the mechanism he understood centuries before any advertiser. Man is not governed by facts, but by symbols. It is not utility that moves the world, but the coherence between the mask you wear and the scenario that sustains it. When this coherence breaks down, the mind enters a state of urgency. You cannot bear the dissonance. You need to align the rest of your existence with the new center of gravity. Machiavelli said that power is not imposed, it infiltrates. And you allowed it to infiltrate the moment you felt ashamed of an object that didn't bother you yesterday. Most people believe this is a lack of financial discipline. It's not. It's psychological engineering. A chain reaction that starts with something small and ends in the complete rewriting of your life. He would have warned you, whoever changes the symbol changes the system. You didn't buy a phone. You bought an anchor that repositions everything else. Your house, your clothes, your habits, your ambitions now orbit this new center. And you don't realize it because the process is silent, elegant, seductive. True power never shouts. It whispers until you confuse its voice with your own. Machiavelli wasn't talking about consumption, but about men who became slaves to their own conquests. He observed princes who, upon conquering a new throne, needed to change their palaces, rituals, and allies because the old symbol no longer supported the new image. You live the same theater, only without a crown. Your kingdom is the feed, the mirror, the opinion you have of yourself when no one is watching. And then you look around and something breaks inside. The sofa no longer fits. The room seems too small for the person you believe you are becoming. The world that embraced you yesterday now offends you. Not because it has changed, but because you have shifted the axis of your identity. Machiavelli would call this the status trap. The higher the symbol, the larger the area of your life that begins to seem unworthy. You still think this is about money. It's not. It's about symbolic submission. Each new object you add doesn't expand your freedom. It restricts it. It demands maintenance, vigilance, care, consistency. It begins to govern what you can wear, where you can go, how you should be seen. You begin to live so as not to dishonor what you bought. The object ceases to be a tool and becomes a judge. And if you think this is an exaggeration, answer silently, why are you afraid to risk something new? Why does a white sofa turn you into the jailer of your own living room? Why does expensive clothing make you walk stiffer, speak less, observe more? Machiavelli wouldn't call this vanity. He would call it a loss of sovereignty. The man who cannot tarnish what he possesses no longer possesses anything. He merely hoards. This is the first mirror he forces you to face, the exact moment you trade dominance for appearances. The instant you believe you've leveled up, but in reality, you've changed your leash. And if you don't recognize this breaking point, nothing that comes after will make sense. Because from here on out, every new choice no longer stems from desire, but from the need to maintain an image that you yourself no longer know when you started building. You wake up on a random Saturday and decide you're just going to organize a bit. There's no drama in that. It's a neutral gesture, almost too domestic to be dangerous. But Machiavelli would have seen it as the beginning of a small war. You open the closet and find that new shirt, bought months ago, still with the aura of status that made you take it out of the store. Next to it hang the old ones, faded, faithful. Suddenly, something changes inside you. It's not conscious contempt. It's discomfort. The old pieces now seem like imposters in that newly elevated territory. They no longer fit the story you started telling yourself when you decided to buy the first better thing. You try to ignore it. You close the cupboard. You go to the kitchen. But the same invisible noise reappears when you look at the scratched table, the creaking chair, the chipped glass that's always been there. None of this bothered you before. Today it does. Machiavelli would call this a symbolic fracture, when the scenery begins to reveal the distance between who you were and who you believe you are becoming. It's not envy, it's not vanity. It's internal coherence. The human brain hates broken narratives. It demands alignment between the mask and the stage. You go out to buy bread and, without realizing it, spend more time looking at shop windows than people. Everything is now organized by contrast. The sneakers you've worn for years no longer match your new watch. The simple car seems too small for the ambition you feel growing. You start thinking about improving little by little, as if that were prudence, when in reality it's a phased surrender. Every small adjustment is justified by logic. Just a detail. Just to match. Just so it doesn't look strange. Machiavelli knew that empires don't fall because of great defeats, but because of concessions that seem sensible. You may not realize it, but your behavior has already changed. You've started protecting your possessions more than your relationships. You avoid inviting people home because you don't want them to see what hasn't been updated yet. You choose places not for pleasure, but for their compatibility with the image you now project. Even your conversations begin to adjust. You mention brands, comment on models, describe technical details as if it were part of you. It's not. It's the clothing of your identity speaking through your mouth. Machiavelli would have observed you in silence and mentally noted this man no longer governs his symbols. He negotiates with them. Power changed hands the instant you felt ashamed of something that had always served you well. And shame is the most efficient weapon there is. It doesn't require force. It simply points to the mirror. One day you arrive home with a bag you didn't plan on bringing. Maybe it's a new pair of glasses, maybe a rug, maybe a painting. Nothing grand. But when you put it in its place, the rest of the room seems smaller, more fragile, out of place. You sit down and try to relax, but your gaze finds no rest. It scans the room looking for inconsistencies, and it always finds them. The piece that the purchase promised doesn't arrive. In its place, an invisible list of next steps appears. Erase the twist that few realize: consumption doesn't happen because you want better things. It happens because you want to silence the tension you yourself created. Each new object is an attempt to restore a harmony that never returns to its original state. Machiavelli would call this a game of compensations. You climb a symbolic step and, immediately, the rest of the ladder seems wrong. The cruelest part is that no one taught you to recognize this process. Your friends do the same. Your colleagues do the same. Social media celebrates it as progress. You are applauded for entering this labyrinth. Photos, comments, likes. The whole world confirms that you are going in the right direction, while your freedom diminishes with each adjustment. And you don't realize it because the loss isn't visible. It's not in your bank account yet. It's in your way of thinking. Machiavelli wrote that the wise ruler does not allow external forces to define his field of action. But you did. By allowing objects to redefine your standards, you outsource control of your life to things that don't breathe, don't feel, and don't care if you break inside to support them. You might be wondering when exactly it all began. It wasn't with the big purchase. It was with the first silent concession, the one you made without witnesses, when you decided that something perfectly functional was no longer worthy of your new image. It's at this point that the story changes course. Because from then on, every choice ceases to be about necessity and becomes about consistency with a persona you no longer know how to abandon. You begin to realize that the problem was never the object itself, but the secret role it comes to play within your mind. Machiavelli saw this when analyzing courts and palaces, but today the palace is your room, your backpack, the screen you carry in your pocket. The new object doesn't just enter the physical space, it occupies a symbolic position. It becomes the silent standard by which everything else will be judged. Nothing around changes concretely, but everything changes in meaning. The old mug didn't get worse. It just stopped supporting the story you're telling yourself. The shift is so subtle that you mistake it for maturation. You say you now have better taste, that you've evolved, that you've left certain things behind. Machiavelli would have been suspicious of this narrative. He knew that the mind creates noble justifications to hide primal impulses. When you feel pleasure in discarding something that once served you, you're not celebrating progress. You're rehearsing a break with your own past. In silence, your home transforms into a courtroom. Every old object is a defendant awaiting sentencing. You no longer see functions, you see hierarchies. The new establishes an invisible yardstick, and everything that doesn't meet that measure begins to cause discomfort, not because it fails, but because it reminds you of who you were. Have you ever wondered why certain old things bother you so much, even when they work perfectly? From that point on, you live in a permanent state of evaluation. The brain doesn't rest. It scans environments, people, shop windows, digital profiles, always looking for the next adjustment. The market doesn't create this restlessness, it only exploits it. Machiavelli said that true power doesn't build needs, it activates latent fears. And the fear here isn't of losing money, but of losing narrative coherence. You don't want to be seen as someone outside the role you started playing. In meetings, you discreetly observe what others are wearing, the cell phone models they place on the table, the brands they mention as if talking about an important relative. Every detail is a symbolic territory marker. You learn, without realizing it, that certain signals place you inside or outside certain circles. Then you begin to adjust your repertoire not out of desire, but out of belonging. It's not consumerism, it's psychological diplomacy. Your behavior is reorganized around anticipation. Before buying, you already imagine the social effect, the aesthetic impact, the feeling of belonging. The pleasure is no longer in the use itself, but in the narrative that precedes the use. Machiavelli would have recognized this as a classic error. When value shifts from the result to the image, you become manipulable. Have you ever noticed how many choices you make today thinking more about how you'll be perceived than about how you'll actually experience them? There comes a point where this process crosses an invisible boundary. You begin to hide versions of yourself. You store old objects in boxes, at the back of the closet, as if you were concealing evidence of a past you no longer want to acknowledge. Each discard is not just material, it's symbolic. You eliminate traces to protect the new identity. Memory ceases to be an anchor and becomes a nuisance. At this stage, life becomes more rigid. You plan more, improvise less. You're afraid of striking the wrong note, of being out of tune, of tarnishing the narrative. Even your experiences become more carefully curated. You choose trips that yield good photos, restaurants that match the style you project, music that reinforces the image you want to maintain. Machiavelli wrote that the prince who lives to please loses the ability to act freely. You're doing the same, only for an invisible audience. And then something curious happens. You start to feel tired for no apparent reason. It's not the body, it's the mind. Maintaining symbolic coherence consumes energy. Sustaining internal personas is exhausting. With each new purchase, each new adjustment, you expand the number of rules you need to obey. What to wear, where to go, who to be seen with, what to avoid. The world shrinks, even though it seems more sophisticated. Have you ever felt that the more you evolve, the less space you have to simply be yourself? Machiavelli didn't romanticize power. He saw it as a game of forces, where those who don't master their own symbols end up being dominated by them. The problem isn't wanting better things. The problem is allowing them to rewrite your internal limits. When that happens, you no longer choose what enters your life. You merely respond to the demands of a system you yourself activated. Perhaps you're starting to realize now that the Diderot effect isn't a shopping spree. It's a silent reprogramming of your identity. It doesn't act on your wallet first. It acts on how you perceive yourself, and everything that comes after is just a consequence. If your current self needed to be defended with no objects around, what would be left of you? There comes a point when the machinery becomes mathematical, and it is at this point that Machiavelli would have stopped observing and started predicting. He knew that every empire falls when the cost of maintaining it outweighs the pleasure of possessing it, but he also knew that human beings rarely do this calculation. You don't add, you feel. And it is precisely there that the game closes in on you like an invisible trap. A curious study from a European university showed that people who buy a high-status item tend to underestimate indirect expenses by up to 300 in the following 6 months. Not because they don't know how to do the math, but because they don't recognize the psychological chain that begins. You buy a new kitchen, and nobody tells you that this also changes how you perceive the refrigerator, the floor, the sofa in the next room. When the white cabinets come in, the yellowed refrigerator starts to embarrass you. The old floor betrays you. The brown sofa seems like a historical mistake. In a short time, what was a renovation becomes a complete reconstruction. Machiavelli would call this an invasion of symbolic territory. A new standard occupies a space and, inevitably, expands. You might know someone who made money quickly. Lottery, inheritance, sale of a company. In the first year, everything seems to have gone well. Trips, parties, photos, new furniture. In the second, strange stories begin: a lawsuit, a poorly explained investment, an endless renovation. In the third, the person is taking out a loan. Real statistics show that more than 70 of big prize winners lose everything in less than 5 years. Not out of ignorance, but because they changed their identity faster than they changed their mental structure. Machiavelli would have been ruthless. You can't enter a new level of power without a system to support it. And then comes the most dangerous illusion of all, that you are merely adjusting your life. You say that now you value quality, that you no longer accept just anything. But observe carefully, you haven't become more demanding of what serves you. You've become more intolerant of what reminds you of where you came from. The new object hasn't raised your standards. It has lowered your tolerance level. That changes everything. There are almost absurd accounts. People who bought luxury cars and started spending more just on parking, special car washes, premium fuel, high insurance, avoiding certain neighborhoods for fear of scratches. The car, which should expand mobility, ends up restricting it. You start choosing routes not for efficiency, but for preserving your image. Machiavelli would say that you are no longer moving in the world, you are moving inside a walking shop window. Another unlikely example comes from clothing. Behavioral research indicates that when someone buys a significantly more expensive item of clothing than usual, that person reduces their use of older clothes by more than 60, even if they are in perfect condition. There is no practical reason. There is only a need for symbolic coherence. You don't want to mix narratives. You want everything to tell the same story, even if that story costs more than you can afford. The mathematics of the Diderot effect is not linear, it's exponential. One object pulls 3, which pull another 5, which redefine 10 habits. You don't add prices, you add patterns. And patterns are expensive. Machiavelli observed this in European courts when a king changed the style of the palace. The entire court was obliged to follow him, even if it led entire families to ruin. Today you are the king of your small court, and each change of style imposes silent costs on everything around you. Perhaps you remember a seemingly trivial detail, that new sofa that made you stop eating in the living room, or that glass table that made you buy coasters, or that cell phone that made you buy a case, screen protector, wireless charger, new headphones, a new plan. None of these items came with the original product, but they all became unavoidable. The mistake is in thinking they were independent choices. They weren't. They were consequences. Machiavelli never believed in the neutrality of decisions. For him, every movement generates a counter-movement. Every elevation creates a zone of instability around it. When you elevate a symbol in your life, you create an entire area of imbalance that demands correction. And each correction consumes resources, attention, mental energy. The real price isn't in the bank statement. It's in the number of decisions you end up making just to keep something standing. This is where the immersion becomes complete. You no longer remember why you started. You no longer remember what it was like to live without this constant noise of evaluation. Your budget is no longer organized by needs, but by maintaining consistency. Money doesn't flow where you want it to. It flows where the narrative demands. And without realizing it, you start working more not to live better, but to sustain a story you don't even know if you chose anymore. The most delicate point in the game isn't when you overspend. It's when you start behaving like a guardian of what you've bought. Machiavelli understood that the true prison isn't physical, it's psychological. You don't lock doors, you lock possibilities. The expensive object demands not only money, it demands vigilance. It asks you to think before you act, to measure simple gestures, to edit your own spontaneity. Freedom doesn't disappear all at once, but through small abdications that you call maturity. You realize this when you avoid certain situations not out of lack of desire, but out of fear of damaging the narrative you've built. You stop inviting friends because the house isn't yet up to standard. You avoid impromptu trips because the car needs a special checkup. You refuse simple invitations because the right outfit isn't ready. Life begins to happen outside the shop window you yourself have created. Machiavelli would write that the ruler who fears losing his image has already lost his power. You govern your own routine as if it were occupied territory. Then comes the cruelest twist: you no longer feel pleasure in your achievements. Each new item is accompanied by anxiety. Where to store it, how to keep it, how to protect it, how to justify it. The pleasure doesn't last because the mind is already projecting the next inconsistency to be corrected. Satisfaction has become an interval, not a state. You live in a sequence of micro-victories that don't solve anything. They only move the problem a few meters ahead. There are stories that seem exaggerated, but are common. People who buy larger houses and start working longer hours just to pay for maintenance costs that didn't exist before. People who change cars and, within a few months, realize that their entire budget has been reorganized around insurance, taxes, maintenance, and accessories. The object doesn't enter life as a guest, it enters as a sovereign. Machiavelli would warn that every sovereign demands tribute. At this point, you begin to defend yourself from your own past. You devalue who you were, as if that were necessary to sustain who you think you are now. You say that before you were too simple, too limited, too small. This narrative is useful because it eliminates the possibility of return. You need to believe that the old version was inferior, or you would have to admit that you lost something along the way. And admitting that would be opening a dangerous crack in the identity you have built. The pace quickens. You no longer wait for the next desire to arise. You anticipate it. You plan, research, compare, calculate. But notice you don't calculate to make the best choice. You calculate to justify. Each decision comes with a ready-made internal speech, as if you were always defending yourself against an invisible judge. Machiavelli would say that when man begins to live in a state of permanent defense, he no longer acts, he reacts. And then the deepest fear emerges, the one that is rarely verbalized. The fear of losing everything and having to go back. Not because of the money, but because of the image. You don't fear scarcity, you fear inconsistency. You fear opening the closet and finding versions of yourself that you tried to bury. You fear the moment when you will have to explain to yourself why so much effort only led to a more rigid, more expensive, and narrower scenario. At this stage, the game is no longer about consumption. It's about symbolic survival. You protect what you've built even if it costs you your peace of mind, your time, your relationships. Machiavelli wouldn't see this as a moral failing, but as a predictable consequence. Whoever builds a throne with objects ends up serving it. The tension grows because you begin to suspect all of this, but you don't know how to get out. There's an unsettling intuition that something went wrong, that the initial promise wasn't fulfilled. You have more, but you feel less. You have more control, but less inner space. And at the same time, you know that any step backward threatens to crumble the entire narrative. It is at this breaking point that the story needs to resolve itself. Because either you continue feeding the system that consumes you, or you reach a breaking point that doesn't involve buying anything more. Machiavelli would say that every empire faces a moment when it must choose between expanding or reforming from within. Yours has arrived now. Perhaps you're expecting a grand revelation, a hidden trick, or a secret formula that will dissolve everything that has been built up until now. But Machiavelli never promised shortcuts. He believed that true power is born from lucidity, not hope. And that's why the end of this path is not a new object, but a silent return to the point where you were still in control of your own history. You don't need to destroy your life, sell everything, or retreat into artificial asceticism. What you need is to reclaim the commanding position you've gradually relinquished. The first practice is brutally simple before any purchase that seems to raise your standard of living. Stop for a minute and ask yourself what else this decision will demand of you. Not just in terms of money, but in terms of behavior, habits, and vigilance. Ask yourself if you're buying something that will serve you or something that will control you. This question, repeated honestly, dismantles more traps than any spreadsheet. The second practice is physical, almost ritualistic. Every time something new enters, something old needs to leave. Not as punishment, but as symbolic cleansing. This breaks the invisible accumulation that sustains the illusion of progress. When you consciously get rid of an object, you remember that you are not building a museum, you are building a life. Machiavelli taught that the ruler who does not control his excesses ends up being controlled by them. Your home is the first territory where this sovereignty can be recovered. The third practice is the most challenging because it touches on your pride. Deliberately choose to keep some status symbols lower than you could afford. Drive a simpler car than your budget allows. Wear a functional, not ostentatious, watch. Allow yourself to be in environments where no one expects you to prove anything. This creates breathing space within your identity. You reduce the psychological cost of existing. You regain the ability to make mistakes, improvise, and live without fear of tarnishing your own narrative. But don't confuse this with regression. It's not about going back to who you were, but about integrating who you were. Machiavelli never despised the past, he studied it so as not to be dominated by it. You can honor your achievements without allowing them to become chains. You can appreciate beauty without becoming a prisoner of appearances. You can grow without becoming a character trapped in your own performance. The most profound effect of this return to sovereignty doesn't appear in your bank account first. It appears in the way you move through the world. You begin to choose less based on external consistency and more on inner truth. You start saying yes and no without needing lengthy justifications. You rediscover pleasure in simple things that don't require maintenance, just presence. Life ceases to be a curatorial project and becomes a territory of experience again. And then something changes in your perspective. The shop windows no longer seem like altars. They are merely objects on shelves. Brands lose their sacred tone. They are just names. Comparisons dissolve, because you no longer measure your worth by the shine of the things that surround you. You measure it by the degree of autonomy you have regained. Machiavelli would have said that you haven't won the game of consumption, but you've escaped it. And that is the rarest form of victory. If at any point in this video you recognized yourself, even if it was uncomfortable, that's not weakness. It's lucidity emerging. Use that discomfort as a sign that there's still room for choice. There's still time to be the master of your own scenario and not just an extra in a shop window. If this content made you rethink a decision or saved you from an unnecessary purchase, leave a like now. Write in the comments, even anonymously, at what point in your life you noticed the Diderot effect at work. And subscribe to the channel to continue learning how to master the invisible games that shape your mind and your choices. Because true freedom cannot be bought. It is regained, one symbol at a time.